Hi, it's Erin. I'm your regular co-host of First Bite. First of all, I want to thank y'all so much for tuning in and listening to First Bite. We've been incredibly encouraged and excited by the feedback we've received and are looking forward to the future. In the meantime, if you've been enjoying First Bite, please take a moment, maybe pause your device to subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening. This podcast started out as a small idea to bring convenient, tangible resources to SLPs and other professionals, and we value your feedback more than anything. Leaving those reviews truly helps us out. Enjoy the episode and thanks for listening.
Hey, Erin, have you heard that we have a promotional code for speechtherapypd.com?
I think I heard the same thing.
Yes. So as if we both hadn't heard that, but it's First Bite. So if you log on to speechtherapypd.com and enter the promotional code First Bite, it takes $10 off an annual subscription. And Erin, do you want to?
That includes all the pod courses.
Yes. And we have 4 now. I'm not sure if y'all knew that. We have 4. We have First Bite. Yeah, we do. It's Speech Uncensored. And in case y'all haven't heard of this lovely lady, she focuses on adults. And I know that there's a fair few of you out there that PRN in peds and or PRN in adults. So be sure to check out Speech Uncensored. And it also includes the Speech Link and the SLP Now podcast with Miss Marisha, who I like fangirl crush. She's awesome. Okay. All right. So promo code is
First Bite.
Whoop, whoop. And don't let it autocorrect you to BYTE because it did that to me a couple times. So there it is. Woohoo! Hi, folks, and welcome to First Bite. Fed, fun, functional resources for the pediatric clinician. I am your host on this nerd venture, Michelle Dawson, MS CCC-SLP, the All Things Peds SLP. I am a colleague in the trenches of home health early intervention, right there with you. I run my own private practice, Heartwood Speech Therapy, in Coletown, South Carolina, and guest lecture nationwide on best practices for early intervention for the medically fragile child. First Bite's mission is short and sweet, to bring light and hope to the world for the pediatric clinician, parent, or advocate. In this podcast, we cover everything from AAC to breastfeeding, best practice for running a private practice, and all the nitty-gritty details involving feeding and swallowing by interviewing the subject matter experts themselves. We bring the data to you. Every 4th episode, I am joined by the lovely Erin Forward, MSP, CF, SLP, a Yankee transplant who actually inspired this journey and who also walks the wild, woolly, and sometimes sticky walk of early intervention with us. Sit back, relax, and watch out for all the squirrels and enjoy this geeky gig brought to you by SpeechTherapyPD.com. We all have those days in our careers where we are struck by a moment of panic, fear, and that gut-wrenching, snap, what do I do now? And trust me, this happened to me just this past week, and I'm still gnawing over if I did the right thing. Well, that's just what we are covering in today's fun and functional episode. What is the right thing, and how do we know how to do it? Today's guest is one of those rare souls whose gentleness, grace, warmth shine through her chestnut brown eyes and immediately put you at ease. Her presence providing a sense of calm, and her wisdom, which I first read about in a book, Professional Issues in Speech-Language Pathology and Audiology. And I read about that like a lifetime ago, way back in grad school. But her wisdom precedes her and is a benefit to all of us in the field. So let me go into my full-blown nerd girl crush mode and introduce the lovely Melanie W. Hudson, MA, CCC, SLP, ASHA Fellow, and National Director at EBS Healthcare. Melanie, I am so glad you're here, and I have so many questions. And y'all, please know that I am right there, way right there with you with those oh snap moments, because this past month I had to make 2 DSS referrals. I had a clinical practicum student with me for a session when a babysitter went out and came back in and had clearly been indulging in illegal smokables, because y'all, South Carolina is not Colorado. And another situation where I was threatened with legal action for a continuity of care phone call to a physician to express true concern for Munchausen by proxy. The family member threatened me with legal action if I just talk to the doctor. So y'all, this past month is going to go down as eventful in Michelle Dawson land. And truly, I had ethical concerns and worries and fears. So it was a valley. But on that note, Melanie, I am so glad you are here. So hi, how are you doing? And thank you so much.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much yourself for having me be part of your podcast. Yeah, we do have those snap moments, and we don't think we're going to have them when we're studying and we're learning to be professionals, and we get very involved in our work sites and learning all the clinical skills and knowledge that we need to have in order to apply those to our various caseloads. But it's one of those situations, too, that you described. You don't see it coming sometimes.
Correct.
And when they do, you are either intimidated, you don't know what to do, so you tend to ignore it. And that is actually a common response. You just ignore it and hope that it will go away. Or you jump right into the other mode, which is, I'm going to call ASHA and report this, depending on the situation. So there's a lot of gray area. There's also some black and white area when it comes to ethics. So let me go ahead, if it's okay with you, Michelle, and kind of give just a little bit of an overview of the Code of Ethics. I know everyone's had this in grad school, but and maybe you've read the Code of Ethics lately, but just to kind of give you the backdrop so it's fresh on your minds now as we go into some of the scenarios that we can talk about when it comes to ethical decision making. Would that be all right?
Yes, perfect timing.
Okay, great. So the Code of Ethics, you need to know, applies to all ASHA members, whether they're certified or not. ASHA has about 204,000 members. We have about, give or take, depending on the year, about 5,000 members of that 204-ish thousand that are not certified. Those could be members who have retired, or they've decided that they don't want to practice anymore, but they would like to keep their membership. So they're still members. It also applies to clinical fellows or audiology students in their 4th year externship who are in the process of getting certified. So for SLPs, that would be the clinical fellowship. So it applies to everyone that's in those categories.
Can I ask a real quick question?
Yes.
I know, or I heard through the grapevine at CSAP that in 2020, we're supposed to have the certification for the SLPAs.
Yes.
Will Code of Ethics?
No, not for SLPAs.
Okay, well, they have their
No. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant for ethics training. Yes. So it's actually going to be probably about 2021.
Okay.
Did you say that, or did you say 2020?
I thought it was 2020, but I mean, if it's
no, that's why I thought you were talking about the ethics requirement.
Oh,
so
no.
2020. Yeah.
The SLPA certification, when that comes,
yes,
will they be held?
That's going to be about 2021.
Okay.
No, but their supervisors will be, because they won't be independent practitioners.
Gotcha. Okay, just wanted clarification.
But any SLPA would have a supervisor of record, and they would have vicarious liability for anything that an SLPA does.
Okay, so y'all right there. Soak that one in. Perfect. Thank you.
But sure. But I'm glad you brought that up, Michelle, because it just as a reminder, or maybe some of you weren't aware yet, that beginning in 2020, in order to maintain your ASHA certification, you have to complete a minimum of 1 hour of ethics training, that would be in your continuing ed, in every one of your 3-year recertification cycles. So that begins in 2020. So if your recertification cycle overlaps into 2020, or if it begins in 2020, you can just be aware of that. If your state requires it, because there are a handful of states that require ethics as well for your state licensure, you can use whatever you're taking in your state for that requirement for ASHA certification. Pretty much as long as it's got ethics in the title, you're going to be okay. Just so you know that. So our code of ethics is organized into a preamble and 4 principles. And under each of those 4 principles, we have all the rules. It's supposed to be designed, or hopefully it is designed, but so that you can look at it and do some self-guiding ethical decision making. It's really written in a way that it's supposed to be user-friendly. So if you haven't looked at it in a while, take a look at it. Things are pretty clear-cut. They're described pretty well there. I know, Michelle, you had asked me to say a little bit about myself, and I jumped right into this. But okay. I did serve on ASHA's Board of Ethics, and I currently serve on the Georgia Board of Examiners for Speech-Language Pathology and Audiology. So I live and breathe this pretty much. So, looking at how they're organized and the way our rules in a state or our code of ethics for ASHA are organized and are worded, they're supposed to be user-friendly. And I want you to just think of it that way. Anything that's in the code of ethics is really suggesting minimally acceptable conduct. So we get out of that thinking of, well, in a perfect world, we would all do this scenario. This is not in a perfect world what we would do. This is minimally acceptable conduct. And I think that's what we have to also keep in mind when we look at the principles and the rules. So the 4 principles, and I'm just going to tell you what they are, because everything we talk about comes under each of these 4 broad categories. Principle 1 is the responsibility to those we serve professionally. Principle 2 is responsibility for our own professional competence. Principle 3 is responsibility to the public. And principle 4 is responsibility for our professional relationships. And that doesn't just mean with other SLPs or audiologists. That means with anyone we work with in a professional capacity.
Okay, so the first one, number 1, to the patients that we
Principle
serve.
1, right.
Yes. Okay, I have always, because I teach the tiny humans to eat and to drink and not necessarily to talk in multisyllabic words, but there's one in there called benefits. So help me out here.
Beneficence.
Yes, that's such a hard word for my mouth to articulate. Please say it again.
Beneficence.
Yes. Okay. So, folks, this is the code of ethics component that I thought of when I had to personally make that call that I referenced. I went in to do an eval, and what I saw when I went to do the eval, I had to stop. I had to say, I cannot assess your little one's feeding and swallowing as everything that I'm saying. They are not safely managing their own secretions. I cannot add food to do a PO trial when I'm watching overt signs and symptoms of aspiration. Not only do no harm, but we're supposed to do good. And when I explained those concerns that I could proceed no further without an instrumental evaluation, that's where my belly went tight and I was threatened. But I had to lean in on my knowledge of my code of ethics and know that do no harm. And
Exactly. That's a good example,
yeah.
Michelle.
And
And that is why this is principle 1.
Yes. And it was, I honestly wept for like a day because I was threatened if I contacted the physician. But, you have to continuity of care. We have to explain these things, why I'm not accepting the patient that you referred to me. But I came home and I have everybody that has listened to me before I totally admit my level of anxiety. It's profound. And I was incredibly anxious over the situation for a solid 2 days before I finally found peace. And it took my husband saying, if you went back, would you do anything different? And I said, no. And he goes, then let it be. And I was like, oh, Mr. Dawson. I mean, he's easy on the eyes, but he's pretty smart too.
Well, that's a good gauge. And I also like when you said you had a knot in your belly.
Yeah.
So often, situations that when we hear individuals come before the board, we just had a case in Georgia not too long ago. And, the individual is basically stating their position as to how they got into a situation. And so often, these are the first words that come out of their mouth, or words to this effect. It's something along the lines of, something told me that maybe I shouldn't, or I had a funny feeling when I did this. It's always that acknowledgement that there was that little inner voice telling you, wait a minute.
Yes.
Wait a minute. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. And it's amazing how many of these cases that come up that end up in, ethical violations. That's the first thing they say. It's like, if I had just listened to that. So that's a really good point, Michelle.
Yes.
You got that knot in your stomach and you followed accordingly. You did not do it. You didn't proceed.
It didn't feel right. And I stopped. I put my heels down. I was like, no, I'm not doing this. And then my clinical mind is like, oh my goodness, but what can we do to save this baby? And this baby needs a feeding tube and blah, blah. And then I'm like, no, got to remember, sometimes your job is to be the seed planter. You get in, you speak the truth, plant the seed. And then if it's meant, it comes back around. Right. But
right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And for the most part in our profession, we're not there to make life or death decisions. If we don't do something, it typically doesn't mean someone's going to die on the spot. And thank goodness we are in a profession where that's the case, because we're not emergency medical technicians.
No, there's too much blood for me. I couldn't do that. There's too much blood. I'm out.
Yeah.
Stitches, nope, not doing it.
But the point is, listen to that small voice. Listen to it because it's telling you something. And that comes from something that is beyond your clinical skills and knowledge. So, okay, so then principle, we went through the principles. You also need to understand that, or be aware of the fact that your states also have codes of ethics or rules of conduct that could be called different things for licensure purposes. And then there's usually another code, yet again, for those who work in school settings. In Georgia, there's something called the Code of Ethics for Georgia Educators, and it's for anyone who's employed in the public schools at a professional level. So it's not geared just for, SLPs or whoever, but so you need to be aware of what those rules are in your own states, as well as ASHA's Code of Ethics. So that's kind of the backdrop, Michelle. You had asked me to address some common types of ethical complaints. Would you like me to move into that? Okay.
So what I know what I deal with, but in the world of early intervention, we have everything from delayed speech, hearing loss, minor delays, all the way down to the least of these that we serve that are palliative care, hospice, quality of life, pleasure feeding, right? That's a really wide gamut. And we have that transition from home health, all the way up to the public schools. So I know what I see, given the population that I serve, might have a different type of ethical dilemma. But in the world of early intervention and just pediatric speech therapy in general, do you have 3 of the most common ethical complaints and concerns? Like, what are your top 3? Because I feel like billing's probably in there.
What you feel like? What is?
I feel like billing is probably in there because
Yeah, I was going to say that. So I'm going to start. I actually had 7, but some of them do overlap with one another in terms of how they all shake out in the end. And these are the common types of. Actually, there were 8, but I took one away that really didn't apply to us. So, but these are the ones that are the most common types that have come before the ASHA Board of Ethics and also come before my state board anyway, that are related to this. And you're absolutely right. One of the first ones, the top of the list, is typically related to billing. And we call that, a documentation lapse. So when we come to these scenarios, I'm just going to, so that again, you get the feeling of how the how the Code of Ethics is a working document. I'm going to point out where you could find examples of some of these things in the code. So if you suspected something wasn't right, or if you even think, heaven forbid, that you did something wrong, you can go and see if it's in the code somewhere. So a documentation lapse, which would be something that, oops, you made a mistake on your billing. You would look under Principle of Ethics 1, Rule Q. So all the rules are letters. So Rule Q will be down at the bottom because it starts with A. Individuals shall maintain timely records and accurately record and bill for services provided and products dispensed, and shall not misrepresent services provided. Misrepresentation then of services is what we're talking about when we're looking at billing. That could actually be a careless mistake. It could be something that you were just not keeping up with your billing, and you sat down at the end of the month to do it all, and you were thinking, I'm sure I saw that little kid that day. I'm just going to go ahead and put it in. Or I'm sure I was there 30 minutes. It might have been 20, but I'm just going to round it up. These are the types of things that it's not something that someone has a grand scheme on how to defraud, but it's those little things that sometimes get us into trouble. So when we're talking about more of a grand scheme to defraud, we're looking at Principle of Ethics 3, Rule D, which is individuals shall not defraud through intent, ignorance, or negligence, or engage in any scheme to defraud in connection with obtaining payment, reimbursement, et cetera, et cetera. The rest is about grants and contracts. So again, we can find billing errors in more than one place in the Code of Ethics. So when we look at reimbursement for services or documentation lapses or errors in billing, the ethical issues in that come into that category typically do relate to intent or fraud or misrepresentation. And ASHA has a good document on that. If you go on ASHA.org and put representation, I can give you the whole link, but it's ASHA.org/practice/ethics/representation of services. If you can't find it the way I just gave it to you, just go on the practice portal, look in ethics, and it'll be a link to a document. Another thing I can do, Michelle, is share these documents with you, and you can share them with your listeners somehow.
That would be fantastic, because we have capabilities to tag them and add them to the Facebook page.
Oh, great. Okay, then I'll do it that way. And then they can see the document
Folks,
right
y'all
away.
Check the First Bite Facebook page, and we'll have it. I'll get the super amazing Chad, the guru producer behind the scenes, to add all that in, because Lord knows I don't know. I am an old millennial and don't necessarily know how to social media that well. So, yay, go team!
All right, good. Well, there are a number of links that I have here, so I can just give you the whole thing. Perfect. And then you can sort through them if you like. Okay, great.
Okay. So billing. And folks, I've seen issues with billing, as in which CPT code to use. And, in South Carolina, we just had the addition of the swallowing CPT code. And we're one of two states where our 92507 treatment of language is timed, and 92526 treatment of feeding and swallowing is untimed, which has led to mass confusion. So, if you have questions, be sure to reach out truthfully, if you have questions at the end of the day, your individual Department of Health and Human Services, or whoever does your Medicaid billing within your state, check their websites. They have CMS manuals. Also, reach out to your ASHA STAR representative. They are your state advocacy for reimbursement for Medicaid. And oh my goodness, Melanie, is it the STAMP that's the state advocate for Medicare?
I think
Yep.
it is. Yeah, there's the star and there's smack. Is that no?
I think
It's
STAR, SMAC,
maybe
and
it's
STAMP,
stamp.
because that's not confusing y'all.
Yeah,
Check
you're
your state
right.
association
You're right.
website. One does billing for Medicaid, that's the STAR, and either the
Right.
SMAC or the STAMP does it for Medicare. Whew, we need easier
Yeah.
acronyms.
Acronyms. I know. I think it is
Yeah.
smack, but double
Yes,
check
but
that.
those,
But some of the charges.
yeah,
Oh,
no, I was
sorry.
just
Go
gonna say,
ahead.
but those are your go-tos for your individual state, and you can always reach up to ASHA. But I have found that they can give you big picture advice on this, but they'll often send you back to your state liaison because they know the inner workings within your state and can connect you with your state
Exactly.
contact. So from two old
Exactly.
presidents, check your state association.
There
Good.
you go.
Whoop, whoop.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. That's right. So a couple of things with reimbursement before we move on to the next area would be keeping in mind that it's not going to come down to the motivation that was behind the mistaken billing. If it was to save time and you didn't want to actually go back and verify that that you provided services, or if it was actually a grand scheme to do this and knowing full well you were doing it to pad your income and anything in between, there's really no delineation. They didn't know what they were doing, or it was a careless mistake. We all make mistakes. That's not the way a board is going to look at that. It may be that the sanction will be a little different. If you have a fraud scheme and it's been going on for a couple of years, and we've had we had one in Georgia not just a few years ago who spent 2 years in prison for Medicaid fraud. She ran 3 private practices, and it was a grand scheme.
We had it down in South Carolina, and I think the jail sentence was like 3 years to the tune of several $1 million.
It happens. I mean, Medicaid fraud is a federal crime. That goes beyond anything that ASHA could ever do to you or a state licensure board. That's a drop in the bucket compared to going to prison, federal prison. So yeah, you've got to be careful. And I think that's the bottom line. Just make sure what you're documenting is indeed what happened, and teach your employees, your clinical fellows, anyone that is being allowed to bill without you overseeing it necessarily. Make sure that they are doing it correctly. Another thing that this can fall under is the scheduling of services more frequently or for longer than is reasonably necessary.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I see that in the world of early intervention. Yes. That is that call. That's a yes. Yes. All the fields.
And another way to word that could be providing services when there is no reasonable expectation of significant communication or swallowing benefit for the person served. Kind of it wouldn't hurt to add a few more sessions on. Or the parents who say, well, we'll pay cash because the insurance has run out. We know the insurance isn't approving it. If you just keep, working with our child, we'll pay you cash. And that's very tempting because now you don't have to justify it to an insurance company or to Medicaid. They're going to pay you cash. And it would be very tempting to say, well, it wouldn't hurt. I'll just keep doing this till, the parents say they don't want to pay anymore. These are scenarios that have happened that we've seen. So in a case like that, it isn't even necessarily true that they were harming the child, but it gets back to there's no reasonable expectation of benefit. They've pretty much reached the benefit that they're going to get, but you're just going to do it to kind of, it won't hurt them with that mindset. And that falls into that category of billing for services that you probably shouldn't be billing for. So we can find that also in Principle of Ethics 4, Rule E, individuals shall not engage in dishonesty, negligence, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. Sometimes these demands can come from a supervisor. They may want you to increase your caseload. They may tighten down on your time limits. They may demand higher production quotas, and it's now conflicting with your professional independent judgment. So you have to reconcile that as well sometimes.
And y'all, you can stand up for yourselves. You can. It may not feel like it. It may feel like they are forcing you. But at the end of the day, when you share, if you were to sit down and have the crucial conversation and lay out the ethics and say, what you are asking me to do, I cannot do because of this, or this. And sometimes I have found if you don't have the relationship with your superior to have that conversation verbally, if you document it in a written email, that will affect change rather dramatically quickly, because then you've also created a paper trail. And what you said in a lot of verbal conversations, once you, hey, regarding our conversation earlier this morning, these are my concerns, and phrase it that way, I have found that individuals will change their tune, so to speak. Yep.
Yes. Good point. Very good point. One thing that I would also, in thinking about early intervention in particular, is because of the wonderful way it's approached with a team, looking at the needs of the children, we can get into that area of practicing outside the scope. When one of us picks up where the other one left off and the other one may not be an SLP, or vice versa. And that can be a gray area. Remember I said ethics is pretty much black and white, but there's also some gray. I think especially for early intervention providers, this can be a gray area that comes up more than maybe in some other types of settings or service delivery situations. So practicing outside the scope of our practice as speech-language pathologists comes under Principle 2, Rule A. Individuals who hold the CCC shall engage in only those aspects of the professions that are within the scope of their professional practice and competence, considering their certification status, education, training, and experience. So take a look at the ASHA scope of practice just to make sure that it actually was revised in 2016, same year the most recent Code of Ethics was revised. And ASHA also has really good information on the website about collaboration and teaming and interprofessional practice. Those are the words you want to put in the search boxes or go on the practice portal and look at those. There are specific policy guidelines there for you on how to collaborate and be part of a team and how to engage in interprofessional practice without having to wonder if you're outside of your scope. And if you are, what are those boundaries? So I would just suggest that for anyone in early intervention, you just be aware of that.
There's one that I did want to touch base on. It's the importance of referrals. And because I have seen that, I make a lot of referrals. I make a lot of referrals because of the medical complexities of the kids. And y'all, that is within our scope. Because I had a student inform me one time that she didn't think it was appropriate for me to be requesting ENT referrals. And I explained to her that it is within our scope of practice to make all necessary referrals. And Lord help me, I can't remember which specific code it was, but if a child has clear airway obstruction component, I have to make a referral to an ENT, because how is a child supposed to functionally eat and swallow if they can't breathe first? First respiration, then deglutition. And, bring a horse to water. We can't always make them drink, but that, y'all, we are supposed to make appropriate referrals. And that's that one always I go back to, because I feel like that was a breakdown and somehow in my teaching, like I feel like something I did not, I was not able to communicate why, you know what I mean? But that's that's personal growth. How about that?
Yes, that's good. And we all engage in that, and by interest and desire, but also by requirement. That's why we have to have continuing ed for licensure and ASHA certification. So, yeah, and again, like I said, there's some gray areas with ethics, but always err on the side of looking a little deeper into it. And I'm going to mention this probably a couple times, but you can always call the ethics office at ASHA and ask for advice. That's what they're there for. And it's a wonderful staff. So take advantage of that. So another area, and we're seeing more and more, this is a rapidly growing area of complaint, is client abandonment.
Yep.
Someone who's got a job and they find something better and they leave. And there's no one there to cover their caseload. And we've had situations, that truly fall under that definition in all settings. So it isn't limited to working with children or working in, medical facilities. It's everywhere. And part of it, I think, and this is just my opinion, is because we have so many job opportunities as speech-language pathologists. For some careers, for some professionals, it takes a long time to find a job. And once you have it, you better hold on to it, because if you lose that job, it's going to take you a long time to find another one. And you stay in a job because you need the pay, and not necessarily because you love it. One of the great things about our profession is that we don't have to stay in a job because we have to. If we don't love it anymore, for whatever reason, there's a whole lot of other options that we can explore. And so client abandonment, we're seeing more and more of this. And that's just my opinion. As I said, I think it's because we do have so many options out there for employment. And if we're not liking what we're doing for a variety of reasons, we just go on to the next thing. So this is in the ASHA Code of Ethics, this area of client abandonment. Principle of Ethics 1, Rule T. Individuals shall provide reasonable notice and information about alternatives for obtaining care in the event that they can no longer provide professional services. So you will note there that it doesn't say 30 days notice. You're not going to see a number on there, because reasonable is the operative word. For some jobs, as soon as you leave, they could have 20 people lined up to hire in your place. So maybe a job like that, reasonable would be, 2 days, 2 weeks, whatever. Other places, it took them months to find someone. You're in a remote part of a state that doesn't have a whole lot of licensed SLPs to begin with. It took forever to find you, and you got that job. And if you leave, it may take them forever to find another one. So reasonable in that situation probably wouldn't be 2 days or even 2 weeks. So that's why reasonable is on there. The other side of that, though, just from the standpoint of the practitioner, is you also can't let an employer hold you hostage, because through no fault of your own, they can't find another person to fill your position. So there is a balance between, as I said, holding you hostage or giving someone reasonable notice. But whatever is determined reasonable notice to be in a given situation, you also have to make sure that when you leave, whoever comes in behind you has nothing to clean up. It is turnkey. You have left it so that they can hit the ground running, and you're not going to have to be looking back over your shoulder, hoping that you did everything for the welfare of your patients and your clients. And that's what it comes down to. So
I want to add
yeah.
a layer in there. One of the other DSS calls that I have to make, honestly, at least once every 6 months, I have to make a call akin to this. I go to the house, I go to a therapy session, and there is clearly either a drug deal going on in the other room, clearly drugs have recently been used in the home, or the loved one is under the influence of narcotics at that moment. In instances like that, when we have to make the contact call to DSS, to the police, to the physician, it becomes a clinician safety factor, then folks, don't go back there. If you are concerned for your physical well-being, retaliation, if there's drugs already in the home that's akin to violence, I have caught. One time I was reading the local news and there was a murder and I was working in a trailer park community, 30 minutes southeast of the city. And I went to go do a therapy session. It didn't feel right. I was pretty sure there was their drugs, but I couldn't, how you just can't peg it but it doesn't feel right. Then to catch the news a little later where there was a murder on that block and confirmed drug use and gang activity and blah, blah. And so my husband, I was like, oh, I go there. And my husband was like, you're not going there anymore. And I was like, oh, but that's when personally in my documentation, I write, due to clinician safety factors, it is most appropriate that the child be taken to a clinic. And then I rattle off recommendations for the closest geographic clinic or hospital. I contact that over with physician, with early interventionists, and give recommendations to them, specifically request this person. Once the referral is made, I will gladly call that clinician and let them know what's going on and what to, where the kid is. But if you are fearful for your life or well-being to go back, you're not doing anybody good.
Very good point. And actually that speaks to the ASHA statement on client abandonment. It says prior to departing, or in your case, if you got there and felt like I'm not even going to go, something doesn't feel right, I'm not even going to get out of my car. So prior to making that decision, a professional must make effective efforts to provide for the patient's continuing care. And you did that. You just described what you did.
That's because unfortunately I have to do it way too often.
Well, and you provided for the care. It doesn't mean that you're the one that has to go do it. And that if you don't get out of your car and go see a patient or a child in that type of situation, that you're abandoning them. If your health and safety and welfare are going to be compromised, you're not going to be accused of client abandonment. But in not seeing that child, you did make arrangements, or you made effective efforts is the term, to provide for their continuing care because you were no longer going to do that.
And also on that note, I had a dear friend who went to go do therapy in a home, and she realized that a family member was recording them. Unbeknownst to her, she caught cameras, and there was suspected domestic abuse in the home. I've had another colleague who went to go do therapy and felt uncomfortable because they suspected domestic abuse, and the father kept walking around with his pistol on his hip, and was making inappropriate commentary to the clinician. So y'all, those are I mean, you got to be tough as nails to work in early intervention. I'm saying, but really truthfully, patient safety, clinician safety too. So
you're right. And that's one of the reasons why many states do not allow provisionally licensed SLPs to practice in
I did
early
not
intervention.
know that.
They have to be fully licensed. Yes, that's one of the reasons. The main reason really is they wouldn't be able to probably have the supervision that they should have. But someone who's provisionally licensed isn't fully independent yet, and they may not be as likely to be in a situation where they could make a decision like what you've just described. How do I handle this? Because they haven't had enough experience yet to step back and make a decision that might mean leaving or, handling it in a way that someone who's had some experience, might be better able to handle.
That's your super polite way of referencing my gray hairs, but I appreciate it. Oh my.
But you're right. So speaking of drugs, we can get into the area of an impaired practitioner.
How often can we just make that casual segue?
We can. Well, that was a great segue, because rather than talking about the clients or the client's family members who might be impaired, you may have colleagues who are impaired. And there's a term, the impaired practitioner. And the definition is an individual whose professional practice is adversely affected by addiction, substance abuse, or health-related and or mental health-related conditions. They have, if you have reason to think that, there's an issue there, they might be someone you would categorize as having what we call diminished decision-making ability. And that is defined by a condition that renders a person unable to form the specific intent necessary to determine a reasonable course of action. It's right in the Code of Ethics, Principle of Ethics 1, just the principle itself. Individuals shall honor their responsibility to hold paramount the welfare of persons they serve professionally. So if someone is impaired, they clearly aren't doing that. And Rule A under Principle 1 is individuals shall provide all services competently. Well, clearly, if someone is impaired and fits the definition that I just provided, they're not able to provide all services competently. So this can be a sticky area if you're observing this in a colleague. And by the way,
I was just going to ask,
go ahead.
I have had concerns in the past about individuals that were beginning with potential early signs, symptoms of dementia or Alzheimer's in forgetfulness, not necessarily impaired in the sense of drug or alcohol use, but actual physiological, cognitive, or physical decline due to.
Yeah, I had a colleague in that situation. So I'll read the impaired practitioner definition again. An individual whose professional practice is adversely affected by addiction, substance abuse, or health-related and or mental health-related conditions. That would be health-related. So again, the thing here, it gets sticky because the issues surrounding this type of situation may be as much legal as they are ethical. Impaired professionals pose a liability to our clients and even to our colleagues at times. So you have to address these issues, these concerns if you see them. But this type of ethical dilemma typically should not be taken on by one person. As a rule, I would suggest you go to the supervisor within a facility, the director, the owner of the practice or the business, an attorney. Depending on where you work, there may be an employee assistant program counselor. There may be an ethics officer or a compliance officer. But usually there's one or more of those that come under those titles in your world of where you're working that you can go to, and you do not have to address this alone. You don't have to have, a confrontation with someone. You don't have to have a critical conversation with someone. You can go to someone that I just mentioned and have that conversation, express that concern. And then at that point, you've really done all you are required to do from an ethical or a legal standpoint in most situations. You don't have to feel like you've got to do it all yourself or you've ignored it. Now, if you do go to someone and they say they will take care of it, and it's obvious to you that nothing's changed, they're avoiding the situation, then you would need to follow up. Maybe go to someone else who can address it, maybe go back to that same individual and say, it doesn't look like anything's happened. In fact, things even look like they're getting worse. They don't necessarily owe you an explanation, maybe working behind the scenes, but you do need to follow up if it looks to you that the welfare of the clients, the patients, the students, whatever, is being compromised. And if you're a supervisor of an individual that falls under that category, that's a whole different part of the Code of Ethics, in addition to, or a separate one, Principle of Ethics 4, Rule 1. Individuals shall not knowingly allow anyone under their supervision to engage in any practice that violates the Code of Ethics. So that's covered there. And Principle of Ethics 1, Rule 5, individuals who have knowledge that a colleague is unable to provide professional services with reasonable skill and safety shall report this information to the appropriate authority, internally if a mechanism exists, and otherwise externally. So it's right there for you. No turning a blind eye.
So much to process. And that's where that impaired practitioner also applies to not just SLPs. And that's where it's always, I've had worries about, a couple of colleagues that were older, and, you have to address those with topics with grace, but they weren't actually SLPs. They were teachers, or they were early interventionists, or they were in different professions. I mean, there was a neurologist here in town a couple years ago that everybody knew. I don't want to go there, but finally colleagues had to intervene and say, it's time to be done now, and that's gloom and doom if you look at it from one perspective. But if you look at it from another perspective, you are doing that fancy B word that I can't ever pronounce. Beneficence. Say that again.
Beneficence.
It sounds like abracadabra.
Do no harm, or allow. I know it does, but do no harm, and that doesn't mean yourself in all cases. It means don't be a witness to someone doing harm and turn a blind eye.
I will practice being able to say that word. I promise. It's going to take a minute.
Write it out phonetically.
Well, you haven't seen my spelling. So, I'm from White Oak, Virginia. Like I said earlier, I'm happy I have all my teeth, but oy vey. All right. Okay. So we have only 8 minutes left because I have to allocate time for Q&A. So with our 8 minutes left, if SLPs are listening, how can they avoid these circumstances and dilemmas? Because you've given us a lot of resources, and I'm grateful that you did. You've given us a lot of resources throughout. But if they come across these, how do they avoid them, or what? And I feel like rule number one, avoiding them, is to, earn your CEUs, actually get through your ASHAs.
Yes.
But so there's your course. Let's go there.
Okay. So there's a little checklist I have here, avoiding ethical dilemmas. First one is advocate for best practices. I would suggest that you go to the practice portal and look at some evidence mapping. Just make sure that what you're doing is what you should be doing in terms of your treatment, in terms of your documentation. And there are a lot of resources available to you, as you said, Michelle, as part of your continuing ed, but also right at your fingertips whenever you need it, where you not only provide everything that's evidence-based and that is to be best practice, but that you advocate for that. Know and understand the ASHA Code of Ethics. Don't let something come up later and say, I had no idea I wasn't allowed to do that, because that's another thing we hear a lot when people go before the board. They weren't doing anything that was necessarily egregious. No, there was not always, serious harm done, but it could be something like practicing without a license, and they weren't doing anything any differently than when they had a license. They just forgot to renew their license. And they'll say, well, I didn't know it was time to do that. So, some of the things are pretty self-evident, but it's amazing how many times you hear people say, well, I didn't know. And knowing what your code of ethics says, knowing what your employer's handbook says, those are things that you do have control over, and you do need to stay informed. Connect the code of ethics with your program's mission statement, their policies and procedures, and with their performance evaluations of your performance. So connect those dots there. Make sure that any supervisors or administrators or colleagues that you work with are acquainted with the code of ethics, or at least know that you have one, that you can provide them with issues and ethics statements, and share with them some of the potentials for ethical conflicts. Have the discussions about things that could come up with billing errors or other areas that could be of concern before they happen. And then, of course, review your federal, your state, and your local regulations and requirements. I already pointed out to you that state licensure boards have their rules, and boards of ed have their, and sometimes called a code of ethics. There's also a really good document that ASHA has on avoiding ethical dilemmas. It's written for schools-based SLPs, but there's some good stuff in there that applies to any SLP. And I will share that link with you as well, Michelle. So that's avoiding. If you want to get into solving an ethical dilemma, I would say that, again, the ASHA website has some very good links to that I can also provide. Always call first if you're concerned. Don't just go right to filing an ethical complaint, because you can do that directly from the ASHA website. Before you file,
I had one thought.
Call.
Also, give yourself time to breathe. I have had situations where and I've got enough Irish in my blood that I go from 0 to 180 at the drop of a hat, right? And I know that. I know a hothead runs in my family, but I have had to physically give myself 24 hours to cool off before I made any calls or complaints or emails, because do nothing out of anger or haste, because that's actually not those exact words, those are my educated redneck words, but filing a complaint that is done to harm or harass is actually a violation of our code of ethics. I mean, I'm not saying I did it to harm or harass, but the perception could be.
Right. No, but you can call the ethics office at ASHA, and if you're just inquiring, you don't have to give names at that point. You can just say, I have a situation, I need advice. And that way they can walk you through what you need to do. But we can basically sum this up by saying Principle of Ethics 4, Rule M, because it speaks to what you just said, Michelle. Individuals with evidence that the code of ethics may have been violated, and it says may have been, have the responsibility to work collaboratively to resolve the situation where possible, or to inform the Board of Ethics through its established procedures. So, Michelle, you're absolutely right. You don't just fill out a complaint to the Board of Ethics. You work collaboratively to resolve the situation. That may mean some of the things I said earlier. Go to a supervisor, go to the employee assistance counselor, wherever you work, depending on what they have. Call ASHA's ethics office and get advice. Or you can email ASHA at their email address is ethics@asha.org. That will go to the ethics office as an email, and someone in the ethics office will respond to you if you'd rather not make the phone call. So, and you can do all that while you're breathing. You're not going to, ruin anybody's career just by putting out some preliminary questions and trying to resolve this.
And I have found that if you go about something with a calm head and not in the heat of the moment, you can actually take a negative situation and turn it for positive. So, yeah.
Right.
So
now, obviously, if you saw something terribly egregious. Someone who's really harming a child. You're not going to just think, well, let me see if I can get an appointment with the employee assistance counselor, or let me see if I can get their supervisor, when I'm all done today. And no, you may have to call 911 or Child Protective Services, and then they're going to ask you to file a complaint.
We're mandatory
So
reporters,
obviously,
folks. We are mandatory reporters.
Exactly. So, but there's a range of behaviors and there's a range of actions that you can take depending on what the behaviors are.
Gray, dude. I hate gray, but gray it is, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Y'all, I've said it on other episodes. We all gripe. And I know that today is December 17th. It's the end of the year. And trust me, I will be the person that pays their ASHA dues at the end of the year because I've got 2 tiny humans and 2 brothers who have birthdays and a husband who all have birthdays like 4 weeks before Christmas, right? So I get it. But our dues go to more than what you realize. And the practice portal, the web tools that Melanie has referenced, people take time out to create those documents. People are there to answer your questions and give you functional resources on the ethical dilemmas that you face, because our dues go towards good. Trust me, I was the one who years ago complained about, oh my God, it's like all the monies at Christmas and but it does go towards good. So that lovely fancy word, beneficent. Oh my God. Yeah. You know what I'm trying to say? We're just going to let the fancy people say it, but it does go towards good. So there it is. But Melanie, if anyone has any questions, how can they reach you? And can you take 2 seconds to talk about that newest edition that just came out in November of your book?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's the 5th edition of Professional Issues in Speech-Language Pathology and Audiology. Mark DeRuyter and I are the co-editors, and we've each written a few chapters. It's got 30 chapters. There is a chapter on ethics that was written by Janie Handelsman, former ASHA president. I've written a chapter on supervision along with Mary Sue Fino-Shumsky, who's an audiologist at Vanderbilt. So we covered both professions in that chapter. We've got a chapter on working in early intervention by Corey Cassidy, who's a dean at Radford University. And she wrote all of the, I don't know what it's called, for early intervention services being provided in Virginia. She basically wrote the code and all of it. Yeah. So she was Corey Cassidy. Corey Hurd Cassidy is her name. So anyway, so great chapter on that. And I think it's a textbook, but it's also a desk reference for practitioners. And Plural Publishing will have that out at the ASHA convention in November. They're taking pre-orders now. But and if you would like to reach me directly, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. And if I don't know the answers, I will get them for you. My email is Melanie Hudson, SLP, as in speech language pathologist, all one word, at Comcast.net.
Beautiful. Melanie Hudson, SLP at Comcast.net.
Yes. And I will get these links to you, Michelle.
Thank you.
So that I'll just send them to you in PowerPoint format so that you can cannibalize it as you wish.
Yes, we'll turn it into a digestible format. Ha 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 ha.
That's right.
Perfect. Okay. And I just have to give a shout out to my sweet friend, Myrnie Myrn, who is a lovely graduate student here in town and has been, we've adopted her into my family and we kind of fangirl together. So Myrnie Myrn, say hi.
Hi.
And I do know that her kid brother has quite isn't it a YouTube channel where he sings? What is his YouTube channel?
Coker 015 Productions.
And let's just go with we have a lot of joy to be found in his productions, and that Myrnie Myrn is a sweet advocate for her brother and for Camp Royale in North Carolina. which is an autism support group, respite care fun camp of awesomeness for all ages from 4 to 65 years of age. So just have to spread joy every which way we can. So if you're in North Carolina,
That's wonderful.
It's amazing. She was camp director over there, and in between undergrad and grad school, and the camp does so many good things. So if anybody's looking for a great resource, or if anybody has a little bit of extra love money at the end of the year, as my daddy calls it, and wants to do a good fundraiser, check out Camp Royale. Am I saying that right? Beautiful. I can say Camp Royale right, but I can't say beneficentist. So there it is. Well,
That's
you know,
funny.
I'll get there one day I'll adult. Okay. So, thank you, Melanie, for your time, and everybody listening. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, hug your peeps, enjoy the last couple weeks of 2019. And Melanie, hold the line so I can switch over to questions. Okay.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay. So, what you doing on Friday, January 24th at 11:30 to 12:30? The correct answer is joining me along with all of our closest colleagues at the January 2020 Feeding Matters online conference. And the two conference or specific lectures that'll be going on right then and there. The first one is a family panel led by Dr. Tara Welker, and she's going to lead a panel discussion interviewing 3 family members and caretakers for children that have pediatric feeding disorders. While simultaneously, they will also be having a separate lecture on family stress and trauma and feeding disorders and how we can support the whole family by Dr. Megan Marsak. These are critical to what it is that we do as professionals, because we're not just treating the child. We are working collaboratively as a team to put tools in the hands of the caregivers, because they're the ones that are there day in and day out. And I hope that y'all will join me on Friday, January 24th at 11:30 to better learn yourself how to help our families. So see y'all
That's
there,
a wrap,
virtually.
folks. Once again, thank you for listening to First Bite, fed, fun, and functional. I'm your humble but yet sassy host, Michelle Dawson, the All Things Peds SLP. This podcast is part of a course offered for continuing education through speechtherapypd.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to learn more about CEU opportunities for this episode, as well as the ones that are archived. And as always, remember, feed your mind, feed your soul, be kind, and feed those babies.